They said she was nothing. He was untouchable. One dance changed everything and turned London's most powerful game into a war neither could walk away from. If you want to see how a girl from nowhere dismantled an empire built on lies, stick around until the end. And if you're watching from New York, Paris, Tokyo, or anywhere else, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's do this. The chandeliers burned too bright. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the Ashford ballroom, her gloved fingers clenched around the stem of a champagne flute she hadn't yet sipped. The marble floors gleamed like ice beneath her borrowed slippers, and the air hummed with 100 conversations she wasn't part of. Silk gowns swirled past her in waves of emerald and ruby, their wearers laughing behind painted fans, their eyes sharp as glass. She didn't belong here. Everyone knew it. She knew it, and they made damn sure she felt it. "Look at her," a voice murmured nearby, loud enough to carry. Standing there like a ghost at a feast. Evelyn didn't turn. She'd learned that much in the 3 weeks since her uncle had dragged her to London. Reacting only fed them. Silence, at least, was armor, but silence didn't make her invisible. "Miss Carter." The voice sliced through the noise like a blade. Evelyn turned, and there she was, Lady Beatrice Harlow, draped in violet silk and cruelty. She approached with 2 other women flanking her, their smiles identical and predatory. "You've been standing here all evening," Beatrice said sweetly, tilting her head. "How dreadfully dull for you." Evelyn forced a smile. "I'm quite content, thank you." "Content?" Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Here? Among all these dazzling people? Surely you'd like to participate." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She knew this tone. It was the same one the girls in her village had used before they pushed her into the pond when she was 12. The same one that always came before something cruel. "What did you have in mind?" Evelyn asked carefully. Beatrice's smile widened. "A dance, of course. I'm not much of a dancer." "Oh, but that's the beauty of it." Beatrice leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried to the cluster of onlookers now watching with undisguised interest. "We'll choose your partner for you." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "That's not necessary. We insist." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "After all, you came all this way from… where was it? Some little village in the countryside. It would be such a shame if you left without experiencing a proper London ball." The women beside her giggled. Evelyn felt the trap closing, felt the weight of a dozen gazes pressing down on her shoulders. Refusing would brand her a coward. Accepting would likely humiliate her. Either way, they won. But there was a third option. "All right," Evelyn said quietly. "Choose." Beatrice's eyebrows lifted, clearly surprised by the lack of protest. Then her smile turned razor sharp. "Wonderful. In that case…" She turned, scanning the ballroom with theatrical deliberation. The crowd had grown, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Evelyn could feel them circling like wolves. Beatrice's gaze landed on something across the room, and her expression shifted, just for a moment, into something darker. Satisfaction mixed with malice. "Him," she said, pointing. The crowd went silent. Evelyn followed the gesture, her eyes moving past the dancers, past the pillars draped in white roses, to the far corner of the ballroom where the shadows gathered thick. A man stood there, alone. He was tall, taller than anyone else in the room, and dressed in black so complete it seemed to drink the light. His hair was dark, swept back from a face carved in sharp angles, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a mouth set in a line that suggested he'd forgotten how to smile years ago. He wasn't watching the dancers. He wasn't watching anything. He simply stood, rigid and still, like a statue someone had forgotten to remove. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Even from across the room, Evelyn could see them, pale, cold, and utterly empty. "The Duke of Blackthorn," Beatrice whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd like a curse. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd heard the name. Everyone had. Duke Adrian Blackthorn, the most powerful man in England outside the royal family, owner of half the coalfields in the north, patron of a dozen MPs, and rumored to have the ear of the Prime Minister himself. But the stories about him weren't just about power. They were about ice. About a man who'd buried 2 rivals in financial ruin without blinking. About a nobleman who never smiled, never danced, and never, ever let anyone close. He hasn't danced in 3 years, someone whispered. They say his heart is stone. I heard he killed a man in a duel once, over an insult. Evelyn's hands trembled. She forced them still. Beatrice leaned in again, her breath warm against Evelyn's ear. Go on, darling. Ask him. We'll all wait right here. The crowd murmured agreement, their eyes hungry. Evelyn looked at the Duke again. He still hadn't moved, hadn't acknowledged the growing attention. He stood like a wall, immovable, untouchable, and utterly indifferent to the world around him. Walking up to him would be suicide, but so would backing down. Evelyn set the champagne flute on a nearby table. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced them to move. One step, then another. The crowd parted as she walked, their whispers following her like ghosts. She's actually doing it. She doesn't know what she's risking. This will be delicious. The distance across the ballroom felt infinite. Every step brought her closer to the man in black, and with every step the air grew colder. It was as if the shadows around him were alive, warning her away. But Evelyn didn't stop. She reached him and stopped 3 feet away, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Up close he was even more formidable. The planes of his face were severe, unforgiving. His hands, gloved in black leather, rested at his sides, perfectly still. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Evelyn cleared her throat. Your Grace. Nothing. She tried again, louder this time. Your Grace, No. The word was flat, final, and colder than midwinter frost. Evelyn blinked. I haven't even... You're here because of a dare, he said, still not looking at her. His voice was low, measured, and utterly devoid of warmth. Lady Harlow sent you. The answer is no. Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks. He'd known. He'd known the entire time. Behind her, she could hear the barely suppressed laughter of the crowd. Something inside her snapped. You're right, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. It was a dare, but I'm here anyway. And I'm asking you, not because I want to, but because walking away would make me a coward. So I'll ask you plainly, will you dance with me? For the first time, the Duke moved. His head turned, slowly, deliberately, and his pale eyes locked onto hers. Up close, they were startling. A shade of gray so light they looked almost silver. Cold, yes, but not empty. There was something there. Something sharp and watchful and surprised. You're honest, he said quietly. That's rare. Is that a yes? His gaze swept over her, not lecherous, but assessing, like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. Then without a word, he extended his hand. Evelyn stared at it. Behind her, the crowd gasped. She took his hand. His grip was firm, controlled, and impossibly warm despite the coldness that seemed to radiate from him. He led her onto the dance floor without hesitation, and the orchestra, sensing the shift, struck up a waltz. The moment his other hand settled on her waist, the room seemed to tilt. You have no idea what you just did, he murmured as they began to move. Evelyn looked up at him, her pulse racing. Then tell me. You made yourself visible, he said, to everyone in this room. And visibility, Miss Carter, is the most dangerous thing you can be. I was already visible. They were already mocking me. Mocking is survivable. His eyes never left hers. What comes next is not. What comes next? The Duke didn't answer. He simply spun her, his movements precise and controlled, and Evelyn found herself caught in a rhythm she didn't know she could follow. The world blurred around them, silk and gold and light, but all she could see was him. Why did you agree? She asked breathlessly. Because you asked, he said simply, and because you were honest. That makes you either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. Yes. The music swelled and they moved faster, cutting through the other dancers like a blade through water. Evelyn could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, could feel the shift in the air as whispers turned to murmurs, turned to shocked silence. They're staring, she whispered. They always stare. At you. At us, he corrected. You're dancing with the devil, Miss Carter. That makes you either complicit or condemned. Society doesn't distinguish between the two. Then why dance with me at all? The Duke's grip tightened just slightly. Because I wanted to see if you'd survive it. The waltz ended. The room erupted into applause, polite, restrained, and utterly hollow. The Duke released her and stepped back, his expression once again unreadable. Thank you for the dance, Miss Carter. Evelyn curtsied, her legs shaking. Thank you, Your Grace. He turned and walked away without another word, disappearing back into the shadows as if he'd never left them. Evelyn stood alone on the dance floor, her breath coming in short gasps, her mind spinning. She'd done it. She'd survived. But as she turned back toward the crowd, she saw the truth in their faces. Beatrice's smile was gone. In its place was something colder, sharper, and every pair of eyes in the room was now fixed on Evelyn, not with mockery, but with something far worse, calculation. She'd stepped into the light, and now she couldn't step back. My tried. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Evelyn found herself pulled into conversations she didn't initiate, approached by people who'd ignored her moments before. They smiled. They complimented her gown. They asked about her family. None of it was genuine. She could feel it, the weight of their attention, heavy and suffocating. They weren't interested in her. They were interested in what she represented, a girl who'd danced with the Duke of Blackthorn. By the time her uncle found her and insisted they leave, Evelyn's head was pounding. She said her goodbyes, mechanical, polite, and slipped out into the cool night air. The carriage ride home was silent. Her uncle, a thin man with nervous hands, stared out the window without speaking. Evelyn was grateful. She didn't have the energy to explain what had happened. She wasn't even sure she understood it herself. When they reached the small townhouse her uncle had rented for the season, Evelyn went straight to her room and locked the door. She peeled off her gloves, unpinned her hair, and sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands were still trembling. You made yourself visible. The Duke's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she let herself feel the full weight of them. She'd thought the dare was the danger. She'd thought surviving the dance was enough. But he'd been trying to warn her. Visibility wasn't safety. It was exposure. And now, every person in that ballroom knew her name, knew her face, knew she'd done something no one else had dared to do. Evelyn closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. She'd wanted to prove she wasn't weak. She'd wanted to survive the dare without breaking, but in doing so, she'd stepped into a game she didn't understand. And the Duke of Blackthorn, cold, untouchable, and impossibly dangerous, had just made her a piece on the board. But the next morning, everything changed. Evelyn woke to the sound of shouting downstairs. She pulled on a dressing gown and hurried down, finding her uncle in the parlor, clutching a stack of letters like they might explode. What's happening? She asked. He looked up, his face pale. Invitations. What? Invitations, he repeated, shoving the letters toward her. A dozen of them. Luncheons, teas, dinners, a garden party at Lady Pembroke's estate. Evelyn, what did you do? She took the letters, her heart sinking as she flipped through them. Every one was embossed with a family crest, sealed with wax, and addressed to her. I danced, she said weakly. With the Duke of Blackthorn. Her uncle sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. Do you have any idea what that means? No. It means you're either about to become the most sought-after girl in London or the most dangerous. He looked at her, his expression grim. And I'm not sure which is worse. Evelyn set the letters on the table, her mind racing. This wasn't an accident. The Duke had known what would happen. He'd known that dancing with her would change everything, so why had he done it? Before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. Her uncle stood, frowning, and went to answer it. A moment later, he returned, his face ashen. There's a carriage outside, he said quietly, with the Blackthorn crest. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What? And a footman. He's asking for you. For me? Her uncle nodded. He says the Duke requests your presence this afternoon at Blackthorn House. Evelyn stared at him, her pulse pounding in her ears. This was it, the second move. The next piece shifted on the board. She could refuse, she could stay here, ignore the invitation and hope the attention faded. But the Duke had warned her, visibility was dangerous. And if he was calling for her now, it meant he had a reason. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Tell the footman I'll be ready within the hour. Her uncle's eyes widened. Evelyn. I'm already visible, she said quietly. Hiding won't change that. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He knew she was right. An hour later, Evelyn climbed into the carriage bearing the Blackthorn crest, her heart hammering as the door closed behind her. The game had begun, and she had no idea how to play. Cham. Blackthorn House sat on the edge of Mayfair like a fortress. It was built of dark gray stone, its windows narrow and tall, its gates wrought iron and unforgiving. The carriage passed through without slowing, and Evelyn caught a glimpse of manicured gardens, empty, silent, and impossibly cold. The footman helped her down, and she was led inside by a butler whose expression betrayed nothing. The interior was just as severe as the exterior. High ceilings, dark wood, and walls lined with portraits of stern-faced men who all seemed to share the Duke's pale eyes. She was taken to a drawing room and told to wait. Evelyn sat, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing. Minutes passed. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed in the hall. The door opened. The Duke of Blackthorn stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He was dressed in charcoal gray today, his cravat crisp, his expression unreadable. Miss Carter, he said, closing the door behind him. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I had a choice. A faint smile tugged at his lips, so brief she almost missed it. You always have a choice, but I'm glad you made this one. He crossed the room and sat across from her, his movements controlled, deliberate. Why did you call for me? Evelyn asked. Because you're in danger, he said simply, and you don't even know it. Her breath caught. What kind of danger? The kind that comes from standing too close to me. He leaned forward, his pale eyes locking onto hers. You danced with me last night. That made you visible. But it also made you a target. A target for what? For people who want to control me. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. I have enemies, Miss Carter, powerful ones, and they will use anyone I show even the slightest interest in as leverage. By dancing with you, I marked you, and now they'll come for you, not with violence, but with rumors, lies, and social ruin. Evelyn's hands clenched. Then why did you dance with me at all? Because you asked honestly. He paused. And because I was curious. Curious about what? Whether you'd survive what comes next. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Evelyn stood, her pulse racing. So, you're telling me that by trying not to be a coward, I've painted a target on my back? And now you're… what? Watching to see if I break? The Duke stood as well, towering over her. No, I'm offering you a choice. What choice? You can leave London, he said quietly. Go back to the countryside, disappear. Within a week, they'll forget you ever existed. Or? His eyes burned into hers. Or you stay, and you let me teach you how to survive. Evelyn stared at him, her mind spinning. Why would you do that? Because you're honest, he said. And honesty is the rarest thing in this world. I'd rather not watch it get destroyed. She wanted to walk away. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to go back to the safety of obscurity. But something stronger held her in place. She thought of the faces in the ballroom, the mockery, the cruelty, the way they'd circled her like wolves, and she thought of the Duke's hand on hers, the way he'd warned her, the way he'd seen her, not as a joke, but as a person. All right, she said quietly. Teach me. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been respect. Then we begin tomorrow, he said. And Miss Carter? Yes? Don't trust anyone, not even me. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the cold, dark room. And Evelyn realized, with a chill that sank deep into her bones, that she'd just agreed to walk into hell. But this time, she wouldn't be walking alone. The lessons began the next morning in a part of Blackthorn House Evelyn hadn't seen, a library so vast it seemed to swallow sound itself. Shelves climbed 3 stories high, packed with leather-bound volumes whose spines bore titles in languages she couldn't read. The air smelled of old paper and something sharper, ink, maybe, or the remnants of cigars smoked in solitude. The Duke was already there when she arrived, standing by a window that overlooked the empty gardens. He didn't turn when she entered. Close the door, he said. Evelyn did, her pulse quickening. The click of the latch echoed like a gunshot. He gestured to a chair across from a massive oak desk. "Sit." She sat. He remained standing, circling behind the desk with the slow, deliberate movements of a predator assessing prey. "Tell me what you know about power," he said. Evelyn blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Power. What is it?" She hesitated, unsure if this was a test or a trap. "Control over others?" "Wrong." He finally looked at her, his pale eyes sharp. "Control is a byproduct. Power is perception. It's making people believe you're untouchable, making them think twice before they move against you. It's not about what you can do. It's about what they think you'll do. And what does that have to do with surviving society?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Society is power, Miss Carter. Every smile is a negotiation. Every word is a weapon. And if you don't learn to wield both, you'll be destroyed before you realize you were even in a fight." He moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of her. "You made a mistake last night." "Dancing with you?" "Being honest." He sat, his expression unreadable. "Honesty is a blade without a hilt. It cuts both ways. You told me you were there because of a dare, that you were asking me to dance so you wouldn't be branded a coward. Do you know what that told me? That I was honest? That you were vulnerable." He leaned forward. "And vulnerability in this world is blood in the water. The moment I saw it, I knew you wouldn't survive a week without help." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "So you pity me?" "No, I respect you." His voice softened, just barely. "Honesty takes courage, but courage without strategy is suicide. So I'm going to teach you how to survive without losing what makes you different." "Why?" The question hung between them. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Because everyone in my world wears a mask. And I'm tired of only seeing masks." Something in his voice made Evelyn's chest tighten. For the first time, she saw past the coldness, saw the exhaustion beneath it, the weight of living in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was commonplace. "All right," she said quietly. "Where do we start?" "With the truth." He pulled a folder from a drawer and slid it across the desk. "Open it." Inside were newspaper clippings, letters, and a list of names she didn't recognize. But one name appeared over and over, Lord Edmund Crowe. "Who is he?" Evelyn asked. "My greatest enemy." The Duke's expression darkened. "And the man who will come for you next." Lord Edmund Crowe was everything the Duke was not. Charming, gregarious, beloved by society. He hosted lavish parties, donated to charities, and always had a kind word for anyone who crossed his path. He was also, according to the Duke, a viper in gentleman's clothing. "He wants my seat in Parliament," the Duke explained as Evelyn read through the documents. "Or more specifically, he wants the coalfields I inherited. They're worth a fortune, and he's been trying to acquire them for years. But I've refused every offer, so now he's trying a different approach. Which is? Forcing me into a political marriage." The Duke's voice went flat. "His niece, Lady Catherine Ashford, beautiful, well-connected, and utterly controlled by him. If I marry her, he gains leverage over me. If I refuse, he'll use every tool at his disposal to ruin me politically." Evelyn frowned. "But you're a duke. You have power." "Power is perception," he repeated, "and he's very good at shaping perception. He's already spreading rumors that I'm unstable, that my investments are failing, that I'm unfit for my seat. None of it's true, but truth doesn't matter. Only what people believe. And dancing with me was a complication he didn't anticipate." The Duke met her eyes. "You're an unknown, a girl from nowhere who somehow got my attention. That makes you a threat to his plan. So he'll come for you, not directly, but through whispers, scandals, anything to discredit you and push me back toward Catherine." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "So I'm a pawn." "You were a pawn the moment you walked into that ballroom," he said bluntly. "But you don't have to stay one. That's why you're here. I'm going to teach you how to play the game. And if you learn fast enough, you might survive it." She looked down at the folder, at the names and faces of people who saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used or discarded. Something cold and hard settled in her chest. Then teach me, she said. And he did. The first lesson was simple: observation. The Duke took her to a garden party that afternoon, one of Lady Pembroke's infamous gatherings where half of London's elite congregated under silk canopies to drink champagne and destroy reputations. Evelyn wore a pale blue gown her uncle had barely been able to afford, and she felt every eye on her the moment they arrived. "Don't speak unless spoken to," the Duke murmured as they walked. "Watch. Listen. Learn who defers to whom, who avoids whom, who smiles but doesn't mean it. That's everyone." Exactly. They moved through the party like ghosts. The Duke was greeted with polite nods and wary glances, but no one approached him directly. Evelyn noticed the pattern immediately. People wanted his attention but feared getting too close. "They're afraid of you," she whispered. "Good," he said. "Fear is simpler than affection. It doesn't require maintenance." They stopped near a fountain where a cluster of women had gathered. Evelyn recognized Lady Beatrice among them, her violet gown shimmering in the sunlight. She was speaking in low, animated tones, and the women around her leaned in like flowers toward the sun. "She's the one who dared you," the Duke said quietly. "I remember." "Then watch her. She's one of Crow's tools. Everything she does serves him, whether she knows it or not." Evelyn studied Beatrice, the way she touched arms, the way she laughed just a little too loud, the way her eyes constantly scanned the crowd. She was performing, Evelyn realized. Every gesture was calculated. "She's looking for weaknesses," Evelyn said. The Duke glanced at her, surprised. "Yes. And when she finds them, she uses them." "Correct." He paused. "You learn quickly." Before Evelyn could respond, Beatrice's gaze landed on them. Her smile widened, and she broke away from the group, gliding toward them with predatory grace. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying. "What a delight to see you. And Miss Carter, how lovely you look." The words were poison wrapped in silk. Evelyn forced a smile. "Thank you, Lady Harlow." Beatrice's eyes flicked to the Duke, then back to Evelyn. "I must say, the two of you caused quite a stir last night. Everyone's talking about it." "Are they?" the Duke said mildly. "Oh, yes. Such a surprising pairing." Beatrice's smile didn't waver. "Though I suppose Miss Carter is full of surprises. Aren't you, dear?" Evelyn felt the trap closing, but couldn't see the shape of it yet. "I do my best," she said carefully. Beatrice laughed, a bright, brittle sound. "Of course you do. Tell me, how are you finding London? It must be so different from— where was it again?" "The countryside." "Ah, yes, the countryside." Beatrice said it like the word tasted bad. "Well, I do hope you're adjusting. London can be so overwhelming for those unaccustomed to its complexities." The Duke's hand settled lightly on Evelyn's elbow, a silent warning. "Miss Carter is adjusting admirably," he said, his tone flat. Beatrice's smile turned sharp. "I'm sure she is. With such an attentive tutor." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, the Duke stepped forward, just slightly, just enough to put himself between Beatrice and Evelyn. "If you'll excuse us, Lady Harlow," he said coldly, "we have other engagements." Beatrice's smile faltered, just for a second. Then she curtsied again. "Of course, Your Grace. Enjoy your afternoon." She walked away, her head high, but Evelyn saw the tightness in her shoulders. "What just happened?" Evelyn asked quietly. "She tested you," the Duke said, "and I intervened, which means she'll report back to Crow that I'm protective of you." "Is that bad?" "It's information, and information is ammunition." He looked down at her, his expression grim. "From now on, every conversation you have will be a battle. Every word will be weighed, and if you make a single mistake, they'll use it to destroy you." Evelyn's chest tightened. "Then how do I win?" "You don't," he said. "You survive. And survival means knowing when to fight and when to retreat." The second lesson came 3 days later, and it was harder. The Duke took her to his study and handed her a stack of letters, correspondence from MPS, business associates, and rival lords. "Read these," he said. "Tell me what you see." Evelyn spent an hour poring over the letters, looking for patterns. Most were polite, filled with pleasantries and vague commitments, but a few were different, sharper, more direct. "These three," she said, pointing, "they're working together. The language is too similar. They're coordinating." The Duke nodded. "Against me. They want to block a bill I'm sponsoring, one that would regulate working conditions in the coal fields. If it passes, it'll cost them money. So they're trying to stop you. And they'll use any lever they can find." He leaned back in his chair. "Which brings us to you." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're a lever, Miss Carter, a way to distract me, discredit me, or force me into making mistakes. Crow knows this, and he's going to start pulling on that lever very soon." "How?" "By turning society against you." The Duke's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "He'll spread rumors. He'll twist the truth. He'll make you look like a scheming opportunist trying to trap me. And once your reputation is destroyed, I'll have two choices: abandon you and look callous, or defend you and look weak." Evelyn's hands clenched. "So I'm damned either way." "Not if you fight back." "How?" The Duke stood and crossed to a cabinet, pulling out a small leather journal. "By learning how to control the narrative. Words are weapons, Miss Carter, and if you're going to survive, you need to learn how to wield them." He handed her the journal. Inside were notes, strategies, observations, weaknesses of key figures in society. It was a map of power drawn in ink and blood. "Study this," he said. "Learn who owes whom, who fears whom, who wants what. And when the time comes, you'll know exactly where to strike." Evelyn looked up at him, her heart pounding. "You want me to become like them?" "No," he said quietly. "I want you to become better, smarter, stronger. I want you to survive without losing yourself, but that means understanding the enemy. And the enemy, Miss Carter, is everywhere." She took the journal, feeling its weight in her hands. It wasn't just information, it was a weapon, and the Duke was teaching her how to use it. Over the next week, Evelyn studied. She learned the connections between families, the debts owed and favors traded. She learned which lords were gambling themselves into ruin, which ladies were desperate for advantageous marriages, which MPs could be swayed with the right pressure. And she learned about Lord Crow. He was more dangerous than she'd realized. His network stretched through Parliament like roots through soil, deep, hidden, and impossible to remove without destroying everything above. He controlled votes, influenced appointments, and had the loyalty of men who owed him their positions. "He's building an empire," Evelyn said one evening as she and the Duke reviewed documents in the library. "He's been building it for 20 years, the Duke replied, "and I'm one of the few obstacles left." "Why you?" "Because I won't sell." He gestured to a map on the wall, a detailed layout of northern England with regions marked in different colors. "These are the coal fields. They provide jobs for thousands of workers. If Crow gets them, he'll cut wages, eliminate safety measures, and squeeze every penny of profit he can. People will die. But he doesn't care about people. He cares about power." Evelyn stared at the map, at the vast territories marked in the Duke's hand. "And the bill you're sponsoring?" "Would establish minimum wages and safety standards. It would protect the workers, but it would also cut into profits for men like Crow. That's why he's fighting so hard to stop it." "Then why does society love him?" "Because he's charming. Because he throws parties and smiles and makes people feel important. He's everything I'm not." The Duke's voice was bitter. "And that makes him dangerous. People believe what they want to believe, and they want to believe the charming man over the cold one." Evelyn looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. "You're not cold." He met her gaze, something flickering in his expression. "You're the only one who thinks so." "Then they're not looking hard enough." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The library was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Then the Duke said quietly, "Thank you." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and returned to the documents. But something had shifted between them. Something small but significant. Trust. The attack came exactly 1 week after the garden party. Evelyn was at a tea hosted by Lady Pembroke when she felt it, the shift in the air, the way conversation stuttered and eyes turned. She looked up from her cup and saw a woman entering the room, tall and elegant, with golden hair and a smile that could cut glass. Lady Catherine Ashford. The Duke had warned her about Catherine, beautiful, cunning, and utterly loyal to her uncle, Lord Crow. She was the woman they wanted him to marry, the perfect political pawn. and she was walking straight toward Evelyn. "Miss Carter," Catherine said warmly, as if they were old friends. "How wonderful to finally meet you. I've heard so much." Evelyn stood, forcing a smile. "Lady Catherine, the pleasure is mine." "Is it?" Catherine tilted her head, her blue eyes glittering. "I do hope the attention hasn't been too overwhelming. London can be so intense for newcomers." The room had gone quiet. Everyone was listening. "I'm managing," Evelyn said carefully. "Of course you are." Catherine's smile widened. "With the Duke's guidance, I'm sure. He's always been so generous with his time. Though I must say, it's unusual for him to take such an interest in someone so unfamiliar with our world." Evelyn felt the trap snap shut. If she defended herself, she'd look defensive. If she stayed silent, she'd look guilty. But she remembered the Duke's words. Words are weapons. "The Duke is kind to everyone," Evelyn said evenly. "It's one of his many admirable qualities." Catherine's smile tightened. "Kind? Yes, though some might call it protective, almost possessive." The implication was clear. Evelyn was manipulating him. The room buzzed with whispers. Evelyn's pulse hammered, but she kept her expression calm. "I think the Duke is simply a gentleman, and gentlemen protect those who need it." "Do you need protecting, Miss Carter?" The question was a blade aimed straight at her throat. Evelyn met Catherine's gaze, her voice steady. "Don't we all, Lady Catherine? In a world where words are sharper than steel and intentions are rarely pure?" Catherine's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, and Evelyn saw it, the crack in the armor, the flicker of uncertainty. She'd struck back. The conversation shifted, other women interjecting with forced laughter, but the damage was done. Evelyn had refused to break, and in refusing, she'd shown something Catherine hadn't expected. Strength. But Catherine wasn't finished. "I understand you've been spending quite a bit of time at Blackthorn House," Catherine said, her voice light but edged with something darker. "Alone with the Duke. How progressive." The whispers grew louder. Evelyn felt the walls closing in. This was the real attack, not the words themselves, but the implication behind them. That she was improper, that she was compromising herself, that she was a scandal waiting to happen. "I've been learning about London," Evelyn said, keeping her voice level. "The Duke has been kind enough to offer guidance, as a family friend." "Family friend?" Catherine's eyebrows lifted. "How interesting. I wasn't aware your family had any connection to the Blackthorns." "They don't," Evelyn said. "But kindness doesn't require a connection, does it?" "No," Catherine said slowly, "though it does make one wonder what the Duke sees in you, what qualities you possess that would warrant such devoted attention." The room was silent now. Every woman was watching, waiting for Evelyn to crack. But Evelyn had spent the last week studying these people. She knew their weaknesses, their fears, their desperate need for social standing. And she knew Catherine's greatest fear, being replaced. "Perhaps he values honesty," Evelyn said quietly. "In a world where everyone wears a mask, perhaps he appreciates someone who doesn't." Catherine's face went pale. It was a direct hit, a suggestion that Catherine herself was nothing but performance, nothing but a carefully constructed facade. "How dare you?" Catherine began, her voice rising, but Lady Pembroke, sensing the confrontation spiraling out of control, intervened. "Ladies, please, this is meant to be a pleasant afternoon. Let's not allow disagreements to spoil it." Catherine's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. "Of course. Forgive me, Lady Pembroke. I simply wanted to ensure Miss Carter understands the expectations of London society. For her own protection, naturally." "Naturally," Evelyn echoed. They stared at each other, two women locked in a battle neither could afford to lose. Then Catherine turned and walked away, her golden hair gleaming in the afternoon light. But Evelyn saw the tremor in her hands, the tightness in her shoulders. She'd won the exchange, but she'd also made an enemy. That night, Evelyn returned to Blackthorn House without being summoned. The butler looked surprised but let her in, leading her to the library where the Duke was working at his desk. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter, I didn't send for you." "I know." She closed the door behind her. I need to tell you what happened. She recounted the confrontation with Catherine, every word, every implication. The Duke listened in silence, his face growing darker with each sentence. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. You fought back, he said quietly. I had to. And now Catherine will go to Crow. She'll tell him you're a threat, that you're not just a distraction, but a genuine obstacle. Evelyn's stomach twisted. I made things worse. No. He turned to face her, and she was startled by the intensity in his eyes. You made yourself real. You stopped being a pawn and became a player. That's what I wanted. But it also means the game just got deadlier. What do I do now? The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You prepare for war. War? Crow won't accept this. He'll escalate. He'll use every weapon he has to destroy your reputation, isolate you, and force me to choose between you and my political standing. The Duke's voice was hard. And when that moment comes, you need to be ready. Ready for what? To make a choice. He moved closer, his pale eyes burning into hers. Stay and fight, or leave and survive. Because I can't protect you from everything, Miss Carter. And I won't lie to you. If you stay, there's a very real chance you'll be destroyed. Evelyn's breath caught. And if I leave, you'll be safe, forgotten, and I'll be exactly where Crow wants me, alone and vulnerable to his manipulations. She looked at him, at the man who'd warned her, taught her, and given her the tools to fight back. The man who'd shown her more respect in 2 weeks than anyone in London had in her entire life. I'm not leaving, she said. The Duke's expression shifted. Surprise, relief, and something deeper she couldn't name. Then we fight, he said quietly. Together. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding. She'd made her choice, and there was no going back. But before either of them could speak, footsteps echoed in the hall. The butler appeared in the doorway, his expression tight. Your Grace, there's a messenger from Lord Crow. He's requesting an audience, tonight. The Duke's jaw clenched. Tell him I'm unavailable. He says it's urgent, Your Grace, regarding the bill, and... The butler hesitated. He mentioned Miss Carter by name. The air in the room went cold. Evelyn felt ice flood her veins. What does he want with me? To use you, the Duke said, his voice hard. To force my hand. To make me choose between defending you and passing the bill. Then what do we do? The Duke's eyes blazed. We call his bluff. Tell the messenger I'll see Crow tomorrow, in public, at the parliamentary luncheon. The butler's eyes widened. Your Grace, that's exactly what he won't expect, the Duke finished. If he wants to play games with Miss Carter's reputation, he can do it in front of the entire political establishment. Let's see how bold he is when he can't hide behind whispers and rumors. The butler bowed and left. Evelyn stared at the Duke. You're going to confront him? Publicly? Yes. That's insane. He'll destroy both of us. Only if we let him. The Duke's voice was calm, but his eyes were fierce. You wanted to fight, Miss Carter. This is how we fight. Not in drawing rooms and tea parties, but in the open, where everyone can see, where truth has a chance against lies. And if it doesn't work, then we lose. He met her gaze. But at least we'll lose on our own terms. Evelyn's hands trembled, but she nodded. Then let's make sure we win. The Duke's lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. That's the spirit. He moved to his desk and began writing, his hand steady and precise. Evelyn watched him work, watched the way his jaw tightened with concentration, the way his eyes never wavered from the page. This was the man society called cold, unfeeling, dangerous. But Evelyn saw something different. She saw someone who'd been fighting alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have an ally, and she'd just become that ally. Whatever came next, scandal, ruin, or redemption, they would face it together. The Duke finished writing and sealed the letter. This goes to my allies in Parliament, men who owe me favors, who believe in the bill, who won't be swayed by Crow's lies. If we're going to fight him publicly, we need support. Will they help? They will if they want the bill to pass. He looked at her. But it won't be enough. We need something more. Something that proves Crow is the villain, not us. Like what? The Duke's eyes glinted. Like evidence, real, undeniable evidence of his corruption. And I think I know where to find it. Evelyn leaned forward. Where? In the one place he thinks is safe. The Duke's voice dropped. His own house. Evelyn's breath caught. You want to break into Lord Crow's home? Not me. He met her gaze. Us. The room seemed to tilt. That's suicide? Evelyn whispered. It's survival, the Duke corrected. If we wait, he'll strike first. If we act now, we control the battlefield. Evelyn's mind raced. Everything she'd learned, everything the Duke had taught her, came down to this moment. Strategy, courage, risk. She thought of Catherine's smug smile, of Beatrice's cruelty, of the whispers that followed her everywhere. She thought of the Duke standing alone against an empire built on lies, and she made her choice. When do we go? She asked. The Duke's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that looked almost like pride. Tomorrow night, he said, during Crow's charity ball, when everyone's distracted, when he thinks he's won. Evelyn nodded, her heart hammering. Then we'd better be ready. The Duke extended his hand. She took it. And in that moment, the game changed. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were fighting back. The charity ball at Crow Manor blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning London's most powerful elite. Music drifted through halls wide enough to echo, and champagne flowed like water while servants in pristine livery moved silent as ghosts between clusters of laughing aristocrats. Lord Edmund Crow stood at the center of it all, resplendent in emerald silk, his silver hair gleaming as he moved from group to group with practiced ease. He touched shoulders, whispered confidences, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Every gesture was calculated, every smile was a transaction. And somewhere in the crush of bodies and silk, hidden behind a mask of polite disinterest, Evelyn Carter watched him, like a hawk watches a snake. She stood near the entrance to the east wing, her pale green gown borrowed from a dressmaker the Duke had quietly paid, her gloved hand steady despite the thunder of her pulse. The Duke was across the room, deep in conversation with a cluster of MPS, his face carved from ice as always. To anyone watching, they were strangers who happened to occupy the same space. But Evelyn could feel the invisible thread between them, taut as a bowstring. The plan was simple, dangerously simple. While Crow played host, while society danced and drank and gossiped, Evelyn would slip into his private study on the second floor. The Duke had acquired the layout of the house through a contact in the servants' network, and he'd spent hours drilling her on the route, the timing, the contingencies. You'll have 20 minutes, he'd said the night before, his finger tracing the path on the blueprint spread across his desk. Any longer, and someone will notice you're missing. Get in, find the ledgers, and get out. Don't read them. Don't take anything that isn't critical. And if you're caught, I won't be caught. His pale eyes had locked onto hers. If you're caught, you tell them you were looking for a private space to rest. Nothing more. You don't mention me. You don't mention the bill. You protect yourself first. And if they don't believe me, then you run. Now, standing in the glittering heart of enemy territory, those words felt hollow. There was nowhere to run. Not really. If she failed tonight, if Crow discovered what they were attempting, he would destroy her so thoroughly that even her name would become ash. But if she succeeded, if she found proof of his corruption, his manipulation of Parliament, his schemes to control the coalfields, then they had a chance, a real chance to fight back. A servant passed with a tray of champagne. Evelyn took a glass she had no intention of drinking and used the movement to scan the room. Crow was near the orchestra now, laughing with a group that included Lady Catherine. She looked radiant in white silk, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate style, her smile bright and utterly false. Their eyes met across the room. Catherine's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her gaze. Recognition, calculation, threat. Evelyn looked away first, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She couldn't afford to draw attention. Not now. The clock on the mantel struck 9. It was time. Evelyn set her glass on a side table and drifted toward the east wing, moving with the casual aimlessness of a guest seeking fresher air or a quieter corner. She passed through an archway into a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced crows, their painted eyes following her like accusations. The music faded behind her. The hall was empty. She quickened her pace, her slippers silent on the marble floor. The Duke had marked the study as the third door on the left, past a statue of some long-dead ancestor and before the portrait of Crow's father. She found it exactly where he'd said it would be, a heavy oak door with brass fittings, closed but not locked. Evelyn's hand closed around the handle. Her pulse hammered so loud she thought it might give her away. She pushed the door open and slipped inside. The study was smaller than she'd expected, dominated by a massive desk covered in papers and ledgers. Bookshelves lined two walls, and a single window overlooked the gardens where colored lanterns swayed in the breeze. The room smelled of tobacco and old leather. Evelyn closed the door and moved to the desk, her hands trembling as she began sorting through the papers. Most were mundane, correspondence about the ball, invoices from tradesmen, invitations to social events. But beneath them, in a locked drawer she forced open with a letter opener, she found what she was looking for. Ledgers. 3 of them, bound in black leather and filled with columns of numbers and names. She opened the first and felt her breath catch. Payments. Hundreds of them. Made to MPS, newspaper editors, even clergymen, bribes disguised as investments, donations, charitable contributions. Each entry was meticulously recorded, dated, and cross-referenced with favors received. This was it. Proof that Crow had been buying influence for years, manipulating Parliament from the shadows, building his empire one transaction at a time. Evelyn's hand shook as she turned the pages. There, a payment to Lord Ashford, Catherine's father, dated 3 months ago, and another to Sir William Hargrove, the MP leading the opposition to the Duke's bill, and another, and the door opened. Evelyn's heart stopped. Lord Edmund Crow stepped into the study, closing the door quietly behind him. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was calm, almost pleasant, but his eyes were the coldest thing Evelyn had ever seen. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "how interesting to find you here." Evelyn's mind went blank. Every prepared excuse, every contingency the Duke had drilled into her, vanished like smoke. She stood frozen, the ledger still open in her hands. Crow moved closer, his steps measured and unhurried. "I must admit I'm impressed. I didn't think you had the courage for something like this. But then, desperation makes cowards brave, doesn't it?" Evelyn forced herself to speak. "I was looking for—" "Don't." His voice was sharp as a blade. "Don't insult me with lies. We both know why you're here. Blackthorn sent you." She said nothing. Her throat had closed. Crow reached out and took the ledger from her hands. His touch was gentle, almost paternal. "You know what these are, don't you? You know what they represent." "Corruption," Evelyn whispered. "Survival." Crow set the ledger on the desk and turned to face her fully. "Do you think power is given freely, Miss Carter? Do you think men like me rise to influence through kindness and good intentions? No. We rise because we understand the truth, that this world is built on transactions, money for loyalty, favors for silence. Everyone has a price, even you. I'm not for sale." "Everyone is for sale." His smile returned, cold and knowing. "The only question is whether the buyer knows the right price. For some, it's money. For others, safety. For you?" He tilted his head. "I think it's belonging, acceptance, the thing you've wanted since you arrived in London." Evelyn's chest tightened. He'd found her weakness with surgical precision. "I could give you that," Crow continued. "I could make you someone, introduce you to the right people, secure you a good marriage, ensure your family wants for nothing. All you have to do is walk away from Blackthorn. Tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you were seduced by his attention, but you've come to your senses. And if I refuse, then I destroy you." His voice didn't change, didn't rise, didn't harden. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. "I'll spread rumors that will make Catherine's implications look kind. I'll ensure every door in London closes to you. Your uncle will lose his position. Your family will be ruined. And Blackthorn will have to choose between defending a scandalous nobody and maintaining his political standing. We both know which he'll choose." Evelyn felt the trap close around her, felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down. But then she thought of the Duke's words. You're stronger than you think. And she thought of the ledgers, of the proof sitting 3 feet away, of the hundreds of people whose lives would be destroyed if Crow's corruption went unchecked. She straightened her shoulders. No. Crow's eyebrows rose. No? I won't walk away. And I won't let you keep hurting people. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed his face. Anger, sharp and sudden. You foolish girl. You think you can fight me? You think one dance with a duke makes you powerful? I think the truth makes me powerful. Evelyn's voice was steady now, fueled by something deeper than fear. And I think you're terrified of it. Crow's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his grip iron tight. The truth is whatever I say it is, and right now, the truth is that you broke into my home and attempted to steal private documents. That's a crime, Miss Carter, one that could see you imprisoned. Evelyn's pulse thundered, but she didn't look away. Then arrest me. Summon the authorities. Explain to them why a girl from the countryside was so interested in your private ledgers. I'm sure they'd love to read through them. Crow's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, they stood locked in silent battle, his hand bruising her wrist, her gaze unflinching. Then the door burst open. The Duke of Blackthorn stood in the doorway, his pale eyes blazing with fury Evelyn had never seen before. Behind him were 3 men she recognized from the Duke's study, MPs, allies, witnesses. Release her, the Duke said, his voice deadly quiet. Crow let go of Evelyn's wrist but didn't step back. Blackthorn. How predictable. Did you really think I wouldn't notice your little spy? Did you really think I'd let you threaten her without consequences? The Duke moved into the room, the MPs following. Gentlemen, if you'd be so kind as to examine the ledgers on Lord Crow's desk, I believe you'll find them quite illuminating. Crow's face went white. This is a private residence. You have no right. We have every right, one of the MPs said, moving to the desk. These allegations of corruption are a matter of public concern, and if Miss Carter was attempting to expose criminal activity, that's hardly theft. It's civic duty. Evelyn watched, her breath coming in short gasps, as the MPs began paging through the ledgers. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to grim determination. These payments, one of them said quietly. Some of these are to sitting members of Parliament. This is bribery. This is proof, the Duke finished, of exactly what I've been saying for years, that Lord Crow has been buying influence, manipulating votes, and corrupting the legislative process for his own gain. Crow's composure cracked. You can't prove those payments were bribes. They were investments, donations, cross-referenced with favors received. The Duke's voice was ice. Dated, documented, in your own hand. You kept records of your own corruption, Crow. You were so confident in your power, you never imagined anyone would see them. The room fell silent except for the rustle of pages. Then one of the MPs looked up, his face grave. This changes everything. We'll need to convene an emergency session. These allegations must be investigated formally. No, Crow's voice was ragged. You can't. This is a private matter. This stopped being private the moment you used public office for personal gain, the Duke said. And it stops tonight. Crow's gaze swung to Evelyn, and in his eyes she saw pure hatred. You. This was your doing. You think you've won? You think this makes you powerful? You're nothing, a nobody who got lucky. And when this is over, when the dust settles, you'll still be nothing. Evelyn met his gaze, and for the first time since entering the study, she smiled. Maybe, but at least I'll be free. Can you say the same? Crow lunged. The Duke moved faster, stepping between them, his hand catching Crow's chest and shoving him back with force that sent the older man stumbling. Touch her again, the Duke said quietly, and I will end you. Not politically, not socially, personally. The MPs moved forward, placing themselves between Crow and the Duke, their voices rising in a cacophony of demands for order, for calm, for explanations. But Evelyn barely heard them. She was staring at the Duke, at the raw fury in his eyes, the protective stance of his body, the way he'd put himself between her and danger without hesitation. He'd risked everything to protect her. And in that moment, she realized something that terrified her more than Crow's threats ever could. She was in love with him. The ballroom erupted into chaos within minutes. Words spread like wildfire, whispers becoming shouts, becoming accusations. Guests crowded the hallways, trying to understand what was happening. Lady Catherine appeared, her face stricken as she saw her uncle being questioned by MPS. Beatrice Harlow stood frozen near the orchestra, her mask of superiority finally cracking. The Duke guided Evelyn through the confusion, his hand firm on her elbow, his body shielding her from the press of bodies. They made it to the entrance hall where carriages waited in a long line, their drivers gossiping among themselves. "We need to leave," the Duke said. "Now, before this turns uglier." Evelyn nodded, too shaken to speak. They climbed into the Duke's carriage, and the moment the door closed, the world outside seemed to fall away. The driver cracked the whip, and they lurched into motion, the sounds of the manor fading behind them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the Duke said quietly, "Are you hurt?" Evelyn looked down at her wrist where Crow had grabbed her. It was red, already beginning to bruise. "No, not really. He could have killed you." "But he didn't." "Because I got there in time." The Duke's voice was rough, strained. "If I'd been 30 seconds later, if he'd had a weapon, if—" "But you were there," Evelyn interrupted. "You came, and you brought witnesses. How did you know?" "I didn't." The Duke ran a hand through his hair, the first time she'd ever seen him disheveled. "I was watching Crow, and when he left the ballroom, I knew something was wrong. I grabbed the MPs I had invited and followed. I was gambling that he'd go after you, that he wouldn't be able to resist confronting you himself. You used me as bait. I gave you a choice to fight." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something raw and unguarded. "And you chose to stay. You could have run when you saw him. You could have lied, could have taken his offer, but you didn't. You stood your ground. I thought you said survival means knowing when to retreat." "It does." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "But it also means knowing when retreat is surrender. And you're not the surrendering type, Miss Carter." Evelyn felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the cold night air. "What happens now?" "Parliament will investigate. The ledgers are evidence, but Crow has allies who will try to bury this. It won't be quick. It won't be clean. And he'll fight back with everything he has." "Against you?" "Against both of us." The Duke's expression darkened. "Tonight, we made ourselves his greatest enemies. He'll come for us with everything: rumors, scandals, legal challenges. He'll try to discredit the evidence, discredit you, discredit me. And society will take sides." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "So we traded one fight for a bigger one. We traded survival for truth." The Duke leaned forward, his pale eyes intense. "And truth, Miss Carter, is the only weapon that lasts. Everything else is temporary. But if we can prove Crow's corruption, if we can show Parliament and society what he really is, then we win. Not just the battle, but the war." The carriage hit a rut, jolting them both. Evelyn steadied herself against the seat, her mind racing. Everything had changed tonight. Everything. She'd gone from invisible outsider to the center of London's biggest scandal. She'd stood up to one of the most powerful men in England. She'd found proof that could topple an empire, and she'd done it all because a cold, distant Duke had seen something in her worth saving. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked quietly. "The night of the dance. You said I was honest, but there must have been other honest people you could have helped. Why me?" The Duke was silent for a long time. The carriage rolled through London's dark streets, the city sleeping around them, and Evelyn thought he might not answer at all. Then he said, "Because you asked." "That's all?" "No." He looked at her, and his expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone fighting to survive in a world that wanted to break her, and I knew exactly how that felt. I'd been fighting alone for 10 years, Miss Carter. 10 years of masks and strategies and endless, exhausting games. And then you walked up to me in that ballroom, terrified, honest, brave, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel alone." Evelyn's breath caught. "You reminded me what it felt like to trust someone," the Duke continued, "to believe that not everyone was playing an angle, manipulating for advantage. You were just real, and I'd forgotten what real looked like." "I'm not brave," Evelyn whispered. "I'm terrified most of the time." Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. He reached across the carriage and took her hand, the same hand Crow had bruised. His touch was gentle, warm. You walked into hell tonight, knowing you might not walk out. That's the definition of courage. Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his pale skin against hers, at the way his thumb brushed over her bruised wrist with infinite care. "What if we lose?" she asked. "Then we lose together." His voice was firm. "And we'll still have the truth. That has to count for something." The carriage slowed, and Evelyn realized they'd reached her uncle's townhouse. The windows were dark, the street empty. It was well past midnight. The Duke released her hand and reached for the door. "I'll walk you in." "That's not necessary." "It is." His tone left no room for argument. They stepped out into the cold night air, and the Duke escorted her to the door. Evelyn found her key, but before she could use it, he spoke again. "Miss Carter, Evelyn." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "What happens next will be brutal. Crow will strike back, and society will turn this into entertainment. Your name will be dragged through every drawing room in London. You'll be scrutinized, judged, torn apart, and I can't protect you from all of it." "I know, but I will stand with you." His pale eyes were fierce. "Every step, every battle. I won't let you face this alone." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what you're fighting for isn't just the bill, or the coalfields, or even justice." He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his face. "You're fighting for the right to exist in this world without being destroyed by it, and that's worth every battle, every scandal, every risk." He stepped back, creating distance between them, restoring the formality that society demanded, but the warmth in his eyes remained. "Good night, Miss Carter." "Good night, Your Grace." Evelyn let herself inside and closed the door, leaning against it as she heard the carriage pull away. Her hands were shaking, her heart was racing, and for the first time since arriving in London, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. The explosion came 3 days later. Evelyn woke to pounding on the door and her uncle's panicked voice calling her name. She threw on a robe and rushed downstairs to find him standing in the foyer holding a newspaper like it might bite him. "What's wrong?" she asked. Wordlessly, he handed her the paper. The headline screamed across the front page. "Duke's Mystery Mistress Caught in Midnight Tryst. Crow. Investigation called into question." Below it was an illustration, crude but recognizable, showing Evelyn and the Duke in what looked like an intimate embrace. The article described how they'd been seen leaving Crow Manor together, alone, in the dead of night. How she'd been discovered in Crow's private study under suspicious circumstances. How the entire investigation was likely a ploy to discredit a respected lord because the Duke was besotted with a woman of questionable morals. Every word was poison. Every implication was a knife. "Is it true?" her uncle asked, his face ashen. "Tell me it's not true." "I was helping him find evidence," Evelyn said, her voice numb. "Evidence of Crow's corruption, that's all." "That's not what London will think." Her uncle sank into a chair. "They'll think you're his mistress, that you seduced him, that this entire scandal is just lovers' drama. Evelyn, your reputation, our family's reputation, I don't care about reputation." But even as she said it, Evelyn felt the walls closing in. Because reputation was everything in this world. Without it, she was nothing. More newspapers arrived throughout the day, each one worse than the last. Some suggested she was a spy sent by rival families. Others painted her as a naive girl, manipulated by the Duke. A few even suggested she and Crow had been working together, and the Duke was the real villain. None of them cared about the truth. By afternoon, 3 invitations had been rescinded. By evening, her uncle had received a letter from his employer suggesting he reconsider his family's presence in London. Evelyn sat in her room staring at the stack of newspapers, feeling the world collapsing around her. A knock at the door. Her uncle's voice tight with worry. "There's a carriage outside, from Blackthorn House." Evelyn's heart leaped. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find the Duke's butler waiting with a sealed letter. She opened it with trembling hands. "Miss Carter, I must speak with you urgently. The situation has deteriorated. Meet me at Blackthorn House within the hour. A B." She looked at her uncle. I have to go. Evelyn, please, think about what you're doing. If you go to him now, after these accusations, I'm going. She grabbed her cloak. Because he's the only person in this entire city who's told me the truth, and I won't abandon him now. The carriage ride felt endless. When she finally arrived at Blackthorn House, she was shown immediately to the library where the Duke stood by the window, his back rigid. He turned when she entered, and she saw the storm in his eyes. They're calling for my resignation, he said without preamble. From Parliament, from the committee investigating Crow. They're saying I fabricated evidence to settle a personal vendetta, that I used you to gain access to Crow's home under false pretenses. Evelyn felt ice flood her veins. What? Crow is a master tactician. The Duke's voice was bitter. He turned our truth into his weapon. Now the investigation is tainted, the evidence is questionable, and we're the villains. But the ledgers mean nothing if no one believes how we obtained them. He moved to his desk, where more newspapers lay scattered. And right now no one believes us. They believe we're lovers engaged in a scandal, that you're my mistress, that I've lost my judgment over a woman. Evelyn's chest tightened. So he's won. Not yet. The Duke looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. But he will, if we don't act now. There's only one way to salvage this, only one way to make the investigation legitimate again. How? The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, We get married. The world tilted. What? Evelyn whispered. If you're my wife, the accusations lose their power. You won't be a mistress or a spy. You'll be the Duchess of Blackthorn. Your presence at Crow Manor becomes explainable. The investigation becomes credible again. His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw. It's the only move Crow won't anticipate, and it's the only way to protect both of us. Evelyn stared at him, her mind reeling. You want to marry me to save your reputation? I want to marry you to save us both. He stepped closer. But I won't lie to you, Evelyn. This isn't a fairy tale. This is strategy. If we do this, it has to look real. Society has to believe it, and that means you'll be bound to me, to this house, this life, these battles, forever. And if I say no, then Crow wins. The investigation dies, the bill fails, and we both get destroyed. His pale eyes burned into hers. I'm offering you a choice, but I need your answer now. Because if we're going to do this, we need to move before Crow can counter. Evelyn's hands trembled. Marriage. To the Duke of Blackthorn. To a man she barely knew but who'd shown her more honor than anyone in London. A man she'd stupidly, impossibly fallen in love with. But he was offering strategy, not love. Protection, not partnership. A transaction to survive, just like everything else in this world. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens to me? To who I am? The Duke's expression softened, just slightly. You become a duchess. You gain power, protection, standing, but you also lose your freedom. You'll be bound by expectations, scrutinized constantly, forced to play the game every day for the rest of your life. That doesn't sound like survival. That sounds like prison. It's both. He didn't look away. But it's a prison we'd share. And maybe that makes it bearable. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down. She could say no. She could walk away, return to the countryside, disappear into obscurity. She'd be ruined, but she'd be free. Or she could say yes. She could step into the fire, claim the power being offered, and fight beside the one man who'd seen her as more than a pawn. She thought of the workers in the coal fields, of the lives that would be destroyed if Crow's corruption went unchecked. She thought of the Duke standing alone against an empire for 10 years. She thought of the truth, precious, fragile, worth fighting for. And she made her choice. Yes, she whispered. I'll marry you. The Duke's eyes widened, surprise, relief, and something deeper she couldn't name. Then we move now, he said. Tonight. We'll make the announcement tomorrow. Hold the ceremony within the week. Fast enough that Crow can't prepare. Public enough that he can't deny it. And after? Evelyn asked. After we're married, after the investigation, after all of this, what then? The Duke hesitated. Then he said quietly, I don't know, but we'll face it together. It wasn't a promise of love. It wasn't even a promise of happiness. But it was honest. And in a world built on lies, honesty was all she had left to hold on to. The Duke extended his hand. Evelyn took it. And somewhere in the darkness of London, Lord Edmund Crowe smiled, believing he'd already won. He had no idea what was coming. The announcement hit London like a cannonball through glass. By dawn, every newspaper in the city carried the same headline, printed in letters so large they could be read from across the street. Duke of Blackthorn to wed Miss Evelyn Carter. Engagement announced. The accompanying article was brief, formal, and devastatingly precise. It stated that the Duke had been courting Miss Carter privately for weeks, that their connection had been immediate and profound, and that he intended to make her his Duchess within the fortnight. It made no mention of scandals, accusations, or Lord Crowe. It simply presented the engagement as fait accompli, a decision made by a powerful man who answered to no one. The city exploded. Drawing rooms buzzed with speculation. Tea parties turned into war councils as society matrons tried to determine whether this was brilliant strategy or spectacular madness. Some claimed the Duke had finally lost his mind over a woman. Others whispered that the whole thing was an elaborate manipulation. A few, very few, wondered if it might actually be real. But one thing was certain. Nobody could ignore it. Evelyn stood in the morning room at Blackthorn House, staring at the stack of newspapers the butler had delivered, and felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything was moving too fast. Yesterday she'd been a scandal. Today she was a bride-to-be. Tomorrow she'd be a duchess. And none of it felt real. "You need to eat something." She turned to find the Duke in the doorway, dressed in charcoal gray, his expression unreadable as always. But there was something different in his eyes this morning, a tension that hadn't been there before. "I'm not hungry," Evelyn said. "You need your strength." He moved into the room and gestured to the breakfast spread the servants had laid out. "The next few days will be brutal. Society will descend on us like locusts. Every word you say, every gesture you make will be scrutinized and dissected. You can't afford to show weakness." Evelyn forced herself to sit and take a piece of toast she had no intention of eating. "How do you do this? How do you live like this every day?" "Practice." The Duke poured himself coffee with steady hands, and the understanding that showing emotion is showing vulnerability. Vulnerability is leverage, and I don't give anyone leverage over me. "Except now," Evelyn said quietly. "You're marrying me. That's leverage." His pale eyes met hers. "Yes, it is." The honesty of it hit her like a slap. He wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was, a strategic move to survive. And somehow, that hurt more than any lie could have. Before she could respond, the butler appeared again. "Your Grace, Lord Ashford is here. He's requesting an immediate audience." The Duke's expression went cold. "Catherine's father." "Should I send him away?" "No." The Duke set down his cup. "Show him to the drawing room. I'll see him." Evelyn stood. "I'm coming with you." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is." She met his gaze. "If we're doing this, if we're presenting ourselves as united, then we need to be united. Starting now." For a moment, the Duke looked like he might argue. Then something shifted in his expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. "Very well, but let me do the talking." They walked to the drawing room together, and Evelyn felt the weight of what was coming settle over her like armor. Lord Ashford was one of Crowe's closest allies, and his daughter Catherine had been the Duke's intended match. This meeting wouldn't be pleasant. Lord Ashford stood by the fireplace, a tall man with graying hair and the kind of face that looked perpetually disappointed. He turned when they entered, his gaze sweeping over Evelyn with barely concealed disdain before settling on the Duke. "Blackthorn," he said curtly, "this is unexpected." "Is it?" The Duke's tone was mild. "I announced my engagement. You came to offer congratulations, I assume." "I came to ask if you've lost your mind." Ashford's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "You were supposed to marry Catherine. We had an understanding." "No," the Duke said calmly. "You had expectations. I made no promises." "You encouraged her. You danced with her, called on her, allowed society to believe I was polite. There's a difference." The Duke's voice turned to ice. and I owe your daughter nothing beyond basic courtesy, which, I might add, is more than she showed Miss Carter when she publicly humiliated her at Lady Pembroke's tea." Ashford's face flushed. Catherine was protecting her interests. This girl, he gestured dismissively at Evelyn, is nobody. A fortune hunter who's trapped you with scandal. "Careful," the Duke said softly. "You're speaking about my future wife." "Your future mistake." Ashford stepped forward. "Lord Crow warned me you were being manipulated. I didn't believe him, but now I see he was right. You've let your judgment be clouded by a pretty face and a sob story, and in doing so you've made yourself a liability." Evelyn felt anger flare in her chest, but the Duke's hand settled lightly on her arm, a silent reminder to let him handle this. "A liability," the Duke repeated. "Interesting choice of words. Tell me, Ashford, does Crow pay you directly for your loyalty, or does it come through your daughter?" The color drained from Ashford's face. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating fact." The Duke's voice was deadly quiet. "I've seen the ledgers. I know about the payments Crow made to you 3 months ago. £20,000, disguised as an investment, in exchange for your vote against my Coalfield bill. That's slander. It's documented." The Duke moved closer, and Evelyn saw the predator beneath the gentleman. Every payment, every favor, every dirty transaction, all of it recorded in Crow's own hand. "So before you come into my house and insult my future wife, you might want to consider that I have enough evidence to destroy you and everyone in Crow's pocket." Ashford's hands trembled. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" The Duke smiled, and it was the coldest thing Evelyn had ever seen. "Test me. Go back to Crow and tell him I'm bluffing. Tell him the engagement is a distraction, that the evidence won't hold up, that you're all safe. See what happens." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ashford looked between the Duke and Evelyn, his face a mask of barely controlled rage and fear. "You think this changes anything? You think marrying this girl makes you untouchable? Crow has resources you can't imagine. He has allies in Parliament, in the courts, in every corner of power. He will destroy you." "He can try," the Duke said, "but he'll have to go through both of us, and I wouldn't recommend it." Ashford turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Catherine loved you, you know. She actually believed you cared for her." "Then she was mistaken," the Duke said without emotion. "I made no promises of love, only courtesy. And that courtesy ended the moment she chose to weaponize society against Miss Carter." Ashford left without another word, the door slamming behind him. Evelyn exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. That was necessary. The Duke moved to the window, watching as Ashford's carriage pulled away. "He'll report everything to Crow, which means Crow knows we're serious, that we're not backing down. And that makes us more dangerous. Or more vulnerable." The Duke turned to face her. "We've drawn a line. Now we have to hold it." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. The Duke hired a modiste to create Evelyn's wedding gown and trousseau. He introduced her to his solicitor, who explained the marriage settlement with clinical precision. He arranged for her to meet with his housekeeper, who would teach her how to manage Blackthorn House. Every moment was scheduled, every detail controlled. And through it all, Evelyn felt like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The wedding was set for Saturday, 5 days after the announcement. It would be held at St. Margaret's, the church adjacent to Westminster Abbey, with a reception to follow at Blackthorn House. The guest list included half of Parliament, most of London's elite, and, because the Duke insisted, several journalists. "This needs to be public," he explained as they reviewed the arrangements. "Society needs to see us together, needs to believe this is real. The more witnesses, the harder it will be for Crow to discredit." "So we're performing," Evelyn said. "We're surviving." The Duke's voice was firm. "And survival in this world requires theater." But beneath the strategy, beneath the careful planning, something else was happening. Evelyn found herself noticing small things, the way the Duke always ensured she had the seat closest to the fire, how he patiently answered her questions about estate management, the rare moments when his expression softened just slightly when he looked at her. And she wondered if maybe, beneath all the strategy and survival, there was something real beginning to grow. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the wedding, the Duke summoned her to the library. When she arrived, she found him standing by his desk, holding a small velvet box. "Your engagement ring," he said, opening it. Inside was a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, dark blue, almost black, set in platinum. It was beautiful and unusual, nothing like the traditional rings society favored. "It was my grandmother's," the Duke said. "She was the only member of my family who believed in choosing your own path rather than following tradition. I think she would have liked you." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered. The Duke held her hand for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing over the ring. "There's something I need to tell you. About the wedding. About what comes after." Evelyn's heart stuttered. "What?" "Society will expect us to share quarters, to live as husband and wife in all ways." His voice was careful, measured. "But I want you to know, you'll have your own rooms, your own space. This marriage is for survival, and I won't force anything beyond what's necessary for appearances." The words should have been reassuring, should have made her feel safe. Instead, they felt like rejection. "I see," Evelyn said quietly, pulling her hand back. "Thank you for clarifying." Something flickered in the Duke's expression. Regret, maybe. "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Evelyn. I'm doing this to protect you. You deserve better than a marriage built on strategy." "Maybe." She looked down at the ring, at the way it caught the firelight. "Or maybe I deserve someone who sees me as more than a tactical decision." The Duke flinched. "That's not, isn't it?" She met his gaze. "You've been honest from the start. This is strategy, protection, survival. But never once have you suggested it could be anything more. And I appreciate the honesty. I do. But don't pretend you're protecting me when you're really protecting yourself." "From what?" "From feeling something real." Her voice was steady despite the storm in her chest. "You've spent so long building walls, refusing to trust anyone, that you can't imagine letting someone in. Even when they're standing right in front of you, wearing your ring, about to become your wife." The Duke stared at her, his expression cracking for the first time since she'd met him. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Evelyn stepped closer. "Tell me why a man who fights for justice, who protects his workers, who risked everything to stop Crow, is so terrified of his own heart." For a long moment, the Duke said nothing. Then quietly, "Because everyone I've ever cared about has used it against me." The words hung in the air, raw and devastating. "My father used my mother's love to control her," he continued, his voice hollow. "He made her choose between him and her principles, and when she chose principles, he destroyed her reputation so thoroughly she died in disgrace. I watched it happen, watched him weaponize love until it became poison, and I swore I would never give anyone that kind of power over me." Evelyn felt her anger dissolve, replaced by something that ached deep in her chest. "I'm not your father, and you're not your mother. No, but the world is the same, and power is still power." He looked at her, and in his pale eyes she saw decades of loneliness. "I care about you, Evelyn, more than I've cared about anyone in years, and that terrifies me, because if I let myself feel it, really feel it, then I give you the power to destroy me, and I don't know if I'm brave enough for that." Evelyn reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. "You're the bravest person I know. You stood alone against an empire. You risked everything for truth. But you're right about one thing. Love is power. And I'm asking you to trust me with that power, the same way I'm trusting you with mine." The Duke's hand came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face. "And if we fail? If Crow wins? If society tears us apart? If this all collapses? Then we fail together." She smiled softly. "But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have been real." For the first time since she'd met him, the Duke's walls came down. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a fierceness that took her breath away. And when he kissed her, it wasn't strategy or performance. It was truth. Saturday arrived too fast and too slow. Evelyn woke before dawn in the guest room at Blackthorn House, her wedding gown hanging like a ghost in the corner. The modiste had outdone herself, cream silk with delicate embroidery, simple but elegant, nothing like the ostentatious gowns society favored. It was perfect. A knock at the door. The Duke's housekeeper entered with tea and breakfast, her expression warm. "How are you feeling, miss?" "Terrified," Evelyn admitted. The older woman smiled. "That's normal. Marriage is terrifying. But if it helps, I've worked for His Grace for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "How does he look at me?" "Like you're the first real thing he's seen in years." She set the tray down. "Now eat. You have a long day ahead." The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock. By noon, Evelyn was dressed and ready, her hands shaking as she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was unrecognizable, polished, elegant, transformed. But beneath the silk and jewels, she was still the same girl from the countryside who'd walked into a ballroom on a dare. The carriage ride to St. Margaret's was a blur. The church was packed, every pew filled with London's elite, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility. Evelyn could feel their judgment like physical weight. But then she saw the Duke standing at the altar, dressed in black, his pale eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle. And suddenly, nothing else mattered. The ceremony itself was brief. They exchanged vows in voices steady and clear. The Duke slipped a wedding band onto her finger beside the sapphire engagement ring. The vicar pronounced them man and wife. And when the Duke kissed her, the church erupted in applause, polite, restrained, but genuine. They were married. The reception at Blackthorn House was even more elaborate. Champagne flowed, musicians played, and society descended like a glittering swarm. Evelyn stood beside the Duke, her hand in his, and played the role of gracious bride while conversation swirled around them. Most were congratulatory, superficially at least, but Evelyn could hear the whispers beneath the pleasantries, could see the speculation in every smile. Then Lord Crow arrived. He entered the ballroom alone, impeccably dressed, his silver hair gleaming. The crowd parted for him like water, and Evelyn felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. He walked straight to them, his expression pleasant, his eyes dead. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "And the new Duchess. Congratulations on your marriage." "Thank you, Lord Crow," the Duke said coldly. "I'm surprised you came." "I wouldn't miss it." Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. "After all, this is quite the event. The Duke of Blackthorn, one of England's most eligible bachelors, marrying a complete unknown. It's the kind of story people will talk about for years." "I'm sure they will," Evelyn said, her voice steady. Crow's gaze settled on her, and she saw pure calculation there. "Tell me, Duchess, how does it feel to go from nobody to one of the most powerful women in England in less than a month? It must be quite overwhelming." "Well, it's certainly been educational," Evelyn replied. "I've learned a great deal about power, and about the people who abuse it." Crow's smile tightened. "Indeed, power is a fascinating thing, so easily gained, so easily lost." "Is that a threat, Lord Crow?" the Duke asked quietly. "A threat?" Crow's eyebrows rose. "Of course not. Merely an observation. After all, marriages built on scandal rarely last, and when they fall apart, as they inevitably do, the consequences can be quite severe." "Our marriage isn't built on scandal," the Duke said. "It's built on truth. And truth, unlike your empire of lies, doesn't collapse under scrutiny." The crowd around them had gone silent, everyone straining to hear. Crow's mask slipped just for a second. Anger flashed in his eyes, raw and vicious. "You think you've won, don't you? You think marrying this girl makes you untouchable. But you've made a fatal mistake, Blackthorn. You've shown your weakness, and I will use it to destroy everything you've built." "You can try," the Duke said, "but you'll have to go through both of us, and unlike you, we don't fight alone." As if on cue, several MPs moved closer, the same ones who'd witnessed the ledgers at Crow Manor. They formed a loose circle around the Duke and Evelyn, a silent show of support. Crow saw it, saw the shift in power, the way the room was realigning, and for the first time since Evelyn had met him, she saw fear in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "No," the Duke agreed. "It's not. But it's about to be." He gestured, and the butler appeared with a silver tray bearing a folded document. The Duke took it and handed it to Crow. "This is a formal complaint to Parliament," the Duke said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "detailing your corruption, your bribery, your manipulation of the legislative process. It's supported by the ledgers we recovered from your study, cross-referenced with testimony from 3 MPs, and corroborated by financial records from a dozen sources. Crow's face went white. "It will be submitted Monday morning," the Duke continued, "and by Monday afternoon you'll be facing a full investigation. Your allies can't protect you, your money can't buy your way out, and your reputation, the one thing you value more than power, will be in ruins." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Crow stared at the document, his hands trembling. Then he looked up at the Duke, and his expression was pure venom. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it," the Duke said calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have guests to attend to." He turned his back on Crow, a deliberate insult, and guided Evelyn away. Behind them, Crow stood frozen, the document clutched in his shaking hands, surrounded by a crowd that was already turning away from him. The power had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Dusk. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house had fallen silent, Evelyn stood on the balcony of her new quarters, not a guest room anymore, but the Duchess's suite, connected to the Duke's by a shared sitting room. The Duke found her there, still in his wedding clothes, staring out at the dark London sky. "You should be exhausted," he said. "I am." Evelyn turned to face him. "But I can't seem to stop thinking." "About what?" "About everything that's happened. About how 3 weeks ago I was invisible, and now I'm a duchess. About how we just declared war on one of the most powerful men in England in front of half of society." She laughed softly. "It's insane." "It is," the Duke agreed. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "But it's all so real. We did this, Evelyn. Together." "We did." She looked down at her rings, catching the moonlight. "What happens now?" "Now we fight." The Duke's voice was firm. "The complaint will trigger an investigation. Crow will try to discredit us, to bury the evidence, to turn Parliament against us. But we have allies now. People who saw the truth and chose to stand with us. And if we lose, we won't." He turned to face her fully, and in his pale eyes she saw certainty. "Because we have something Crow doesn't." "What?" "Each other." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding band. "You said love is power. You were right, and I'm done being afraid of it." Evelyn's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this started as strategy, but it became something more. Somewhere between the first dance and this moment, I stopped seeing you as an ally and started seeing you as—" He paused, searching for words. "As the person I want to fight beside for the rest of my life. Not because I have to, but because I choose to." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. "You choose to?" "I choose to." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "I choose you, Evelyn. Not for survival, not for strategy, but because you're the bravest, most honest person I've ever met, and I love you." The words shattered every wall Evelyn had built around her heart. "I love you too," she whispered. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't performance or necessity, it was promise. They stood there in the moonlight, two people who'd walked into hell and come out transformed, no longer alone, no longer afraid. And somewhere in the darkness of London, Lord Edmund Crow sat in his empty study, staring at the formal complaint that would destroy him, and finally understood that he'd lost. Not because the Duke was stronger, but because he'd never been alone. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of London weather that turned cobblestones slick and made the Thames look like hammered steel. But inside the Houses of Parliament, the atmosphere was scorching. The Duke sat in the committee room designated for the emergency session, his posture rigid, his expression carved from ice. Beside him, 3 MPs who'd witnessed the ledgers, Lords Hartwell, Morrison, and Sir Geoffrey Dane, arranged documents with methodical precision. Across the table sat the investigative committee, 7 stern-faced men tasked with determining whether Lord Edmund Crow's corruption warranted formal charges. And in the gallery above, separated from the proceedings by decorum, but present nonetheless, Evelyn watched. She'd insisted on coming despite the Duke's protests. "If this is about truth," she'd said that morning as they dressed, "then I need to see it through, all of it." Now, as the committee chairman, Lord Pemberton, a gray-haired man with eyes like flint, called the session to order, Evelyn felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. "We are here," Pemberton began, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room, to examine allegations of corruption and bribery leveled against Lord Edmund Crowe by the Duke of Blackthorn. These are serious charges that, if proven, could result in expulsion from Parliament, criminal prosecution, and forfeiture of titles and property. A murmur rippled through the room. Pemberton's gaze settled on the Duke. "Your Grace, you may present your evidence." The Duke stood, and the room fell silent. He moved with the controlled grace of a man who'd spent his entire life in spaces like this. But Evelyn saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Gentlemen," the Duke began, his voice steady and clear, "what I'm about to show you represents years of systematic corruption. Lord Crowe has used bribery, intimidation, and manipulation to control votes, influence policy, and enrich himself at the expense of this nation's workers and citizens." He nodded to Hartwell, who opened the first ledger and began reading entries aloud. Each one was damning: a payment to an MP, followed by a recorded vote in Crowe's favor, a donation to a newspaper followed by favorable coverage, a gift to a judge followed by a ruling that benefited Crowe's interests. The pattern was undeniable. As the evidence mounted, Evelyn watched the committee members' faces change. Skepticism gave way to shock to grim recognition. They'd all suspected something, she realized, but suspicion and proof were different animals. When Hartwell finished, Morrison stood and presented financial records showing how Crowe had funneled money through shell companies to hide the bribes. Then Dane produced correspondence, letters where Crowe explicitly outlined his strategy to buy influence and control legislation. It was brutal, methodical, irrefutable. And through it all, the Duke stood silent, letting the evidence speak. Finally, Pemberton raised a hand. "This is extensive, but I must ask, how did you acquire these documents?" Lord Crowe claims they were stolen from his private residence during the charity ball. The room tensed. The Duke met Pemberton's gaze without flinching. "They were recovered, not stolen. Miss Carter, now the Duchess of Blackthorn, discovered them while Lord Crowe was publicly hosting hundreds of guests. When she attempted to leave, he confronted her, threatened her, and physically restrained her. I intervened with witnesses present. The ledgers were then examined by MPs Hartwell, Morrison, and Dane, who can attest to their contents. Lord Crowe claims the Duchess was trespassing," one committee member said, "that she broke into his study without permission." "A study whose door was unlocked," the Duke countered, "in a house open to guests. And even if it were trespassing, the evidence of corruption doesn't become invalid because of how it was obtained. The question isn't whether my wife committed a social faux pas. It's whether Lord Crowe committed crimes against Parliament and the people of England." Evelyn felt pride swell in her chest. He'd called her his wife without hesitation, claimed her publicly, defended her without apology. Pemberton frowned. "Nevertheless, the circumstances are irregular." "The circumstances are irrelevant," the Duke interrupted, his voice turning to steel. "You have proof of corruption sitting in front of you, documented, corroborated, undeniable. The only question is whether you have the courage to act on it." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Pemberton said quietly, "Lord Crowe has requested the opportunity to defend himself. He's waiting outside. Should we hear him?" The Duke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "By all means, let him try." Lord Edmund Crowe entered the committee room like a man walking to his execution. His usual confidence had cracked, replaced by something brittle and desperate. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his clothes immaculate, but his eyes were bloodshot and his hands trembled slightly as he took his seat. Evelyn leaned forward in the gallery, her heart pounding. Pemberton addressed him formally. "Lord Crowe, you've been accused of corruption, bribery, and abuse of office. How do you respond?" Crowe's voice was steady, but Evelyn could hear the strain beneath it. "These accusations are fabrications. The Duke of Blackthorn has long opposed my political positions, and this is his attempt to silence me through character assassination. The ledgers were taken illegally, their contents taken out of context. They're in your handwriting," Morrison interrupted. "Each entry cross-references specific votes and favors. How is that out of context?" "Business transactions," Crowe said. "Investments. All perfectly legal." "Investments that coincidentally align with legislative votes?" Dane's voice was sharp. "You expect us to believe that's coincidence?" I expect you to follow the law, Crow shot back. Evidence obtained through theft is inadmissible. This isn't a criminal trial, the Duke said coldly. This is a parliamentary inquiry, and in this chamber, truth matters more than procedure. You corrupted the legislative process. You sold votes. You betrayed the trust of the people who elected you, and no amount of legal maneuvering will change those facts. Crow's mask finally shattered. You self-righteous hypocrite. You think you're better than me? You think your hands are clean? You use your title to bully opponents, your wealth to buy loyalty, your power to crush anyone who disagrees with you. We're the same, Blackthorn. The only difference is I'm honest about it. No, the Duke said quietly. The difference is I fight for something beyond myself. The Coalfield Bill would protect thousands of workers. Your corruption would destroy them. That's not politics. That's cruelty. It's survival, Crow's voice rose. This world rewards the strong and crushes the weak. I did what I had to do to survive, to build something, to matter. And you had everything handed to you, title, wealth, power. You've never had to fight for anything. You're wrong. The Duke's pale eyes burned. I fought every day of my life. Against expectations, against my father's legacy, against a system designed to favor men like you. But I never betrayed the people who depended on me. I never sold my integrity for profit. And I sure as hell never convinced myself that cruelty was the same as strength. The room erupted in murmurs. Pemberton banged his gavel. Order! Lord Crow, do you have any evidence to refute these charges? Any documentation that proves these were legitimate transactions? Crow's face was ashen. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said hoarsely, I refuse to answer on the grounds that this committee is compromised. The Duke has poisoned you against me. The ledgers poisoned us against you, Pemberton said flatly. Your own records, your own words. He looked at the other committee members. Gentlemen, I believe we've heard enough. Shall we vote? The vote was swift and unanimous. Lord Edmund Crow was found guilty of corruption and abuse of office. He would be stripped of his parliamentary seat, his titles under review, his assets frozen pending criminal investigation. Crow sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Then, slowly, he stood and looked at the Duke. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, the Duke replied. It is. Crow turned and walked out, his steps unsteady, his empire crumbling with every footfall. And Evelyn, watching from the gallery, felt something shift in the world. Like a weightlifting, like justice, finally, impossibly, winning. The aftermath was chaos. News of Crow's downfall spread through London like wildfire. By afternoon, every newspaper carried the story. By evening, society was in uproar, some celebrating, some decrying the investigation as political theater, most simply shocked that someone as powerful as Crow could fall so completely. The Duke and Evelyn returned to Blackthorn House to find it besieged by visitors, well-wishers, opportunists, journalists, and enemies wearing friendly masks. The Duke's staff turned most away, but a few were admitted. The MPs who'd stood with them, colleagues from Parliament, even a representative from the workers' unions in the north. They want to thank you, the butler explained. The miners. They heard about the bill, about what you did. They're organizing a delegation. The Duke looked startled, genuinely surprised. That's not necessary. It is to them, Evelyn said softly. You fought for them. The least you can do is let them say thank you. He met her gaze, and something vulnerable crossed his face. I'm not used to gratitude. I know. She took his hand, but you better get used to it, because you just changed a lot of lives. That evening, they sat together in the library, their library now, Evelyn realized with a start. Her home, her life. The transition still felt surreal. What happens to Catherine? Evelyn asked. And Lord Ashford? The Duke poured them both brandy. Ashford will likely resign before he's forced out. His payments from Crow are documented, and he knows it. As for Catherine, he paused. She wrote to me this morning. Evelyn's eyebrows rose. What did she say? That she was wrong. That she'd been used by her father and Crow, and she didn't realize how deep the corruption went. He handed Evelyn the letter. She's apologizing. Evelyn read it, surprised by the sincerity in Catherine's words. The proud cutting woman from the tea party was gone, replaced by someone who sounded lost and genuinely remorseful. "Do you believe her?" Evelyn asked. "I think she believed what she was told," the Duke said carefully. "That I was the villain, that you were a threat, that defending her uncle's interests was protecting her family. But now she sees the truth, and she has to live with the consequences. What will you do?" "Nothing." The Duke's voice was firm. "She made her choices. She participated in trying to destroy us. Forgiveness is one thing, trust is another. She'll have to rebuild her life without my help." Evelyn nodded, understanding. Some wounds healed, others left scars. But as she sat there in the firelight, her husband beside her, she felt something she hadn't felt since arriving in London. Peace. Over the next few days, more letters arrived. Some were congratulatory, others threatening. Lady Beatrice sent a brief note claiming she'd been deceived by Crow and hoped to repair their relationship. Evelyn burned it without responding. Some betrayals didn't deserve second chances, but the letter that mattered most came from Evelyn's uncle. He'd been terrified throughout the entire ordeal, convinced their family would be destroyed. Now he wrote with shaking gratitude, thanking the Duke for protecting Evelyn and offering his eternal loyalty. "He's trying too hard," Evelyn said, showing the Duke the letter. "He's relieved," the Duke replied. "Your uncle isn't a strong man, but he loves you. Fear makes people do desperate things. The question is whether they learn from it. Will he? That's up to him." The Duke set the letter aside. "But you don't owe him anything beyond basic kindness. He brought you to London and then left you to survive alone. That's not protection." Evelyn felt warmth bloom in her chest. The Duke understood what it felt like to be abandoned by family, to be forced to fight alone. And he was making sure she never felt that way again. The Coalfield Bill passed 3 weeks later. The vote was decisive, 73 to 27, with most of Crow's former allies either absent or quietly switching sides. The bill established minimum wages, safety standards, and worker protections that would affect thousands of lives across northern England. The Duke received the news in his study, surrounded by the MPs who'd fought beside him. Evelyn watched from the doorway as they celebrated with quiet satisfaction. These weren't men given to loud displays, but their relief was palpable. When the others left, the Duke turned to Evelyn, and she saw tears in his eyes for the first time. "We did it," he said hoarsely. "You did it," Evelyn corrected. "You fought for 10 years for this. But I couldn't have finished it without you." He crossed to her, pulling her close. "You gave me something I'd lost. Hope. The belief that fighting for truth actually mattered. You made me remember why I started this in the first place." Evelyn kissed him softly. "Then we did it together." They stood there in the afternoon light, two people who'd been strangers a month ago and were now bound by something stronger than strategy or survival. Love. That evening, the Duke surprised her by taking her to the rooftop of Blackthorn House, a space she hadn't known existed. It was flat, surrounded by a low wall, with views of London stretching in every direction. "I come here when I need to think," he said, "when the house feels too small and the world feels too big. My grandmother showed it to me when I was a boy. She said powerful people need perspective, need to remember they're just one small part of something larger." Evelyn looked out at the city, at the thousands of lights beginning to glow as evening fell. Somewhere out there, miners were returning home to families, knowing their work would be safer tomorrow than it had been yesterday. Somewhere, workers were reading about the bill and feeling hope for the first time in years. "Your grandmother sounds like she was remarkable," Evelyn said. "She was the only person who saw me as more than a title," the Duke replied. "The only one who taught me that power means responsibility. When she died, I felt like I'd lost the only person who understood what I was trying to do." "You're not alone anymore." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No, I'm not." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, and Evelyn felt the last of her fear dissolve. She'd walked into hell and come out transformed, not just surviving, but thriving, not just accepted, but loved. A week later, the Duke surprised Evelyn with a trip north to the coalfields. They traveled by train through countryside that gradually turned industrial, green fields giving way to mining towns, smoke rising from distant furnaces, the landscape scarred by decades of extraction. But when they arrived, Evelyn saw something unexpected. Hope. The miners had organized a reception. Hundreds of them, along with their families, gathered outside the largest mine. They cheered when the Duke's carriage appeared, their faces weathered but smiling, their hands calloused but raised in salute. A man stepped forward, older, his face seamed with coal dust that soap would never fully remove. "Your Grace, Duchess, we wanted to say thank you for fighting for us when no one else would." The Duke looked overwhelmed. "I only did what was right. You did more than that." The miner's voice was thick with emotion. "You gave us dignity. You made Parliament see us as people, not just labor. My son," he gestured to a boy of perhaps 12, "will grow up with safer working conditions because of you. That's not just right. That's life-changing." Other miners stepped forward, sharing stories of family members lost to unsafe conditions, of wages too low to survive on, of being treated as disposable. One woman, her eyes red from crying, told them how her husband had died in a collapse 3 years ago, a collapse that could have been prevented with proper supports. "The new regulations would have saved him," she said quietly. "They'll save others. That has to mean something." The Duke's voice was rough when he replied. "It means everything." They showed the Duke and Evelyn the changes already taking place, new safety equipment being installed, wage increases posted on notice boards, representatives being elected to speak for the workers. The bill was already making a difference. A young miner, barely 20, approached Evelyn specifically. "Duchess, they're saying you were the one who found the proof, that you stood up to Lord Crow when everyone else was too scared." Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The Duke did the hard work, but you stood with him." The young man's eyes were bright with admiration. "My mum says that's what matters, that powerful men need good women to keep them honest. She says you're proof that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and doing what's right anyway." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is," he grinned, "and she's over there if you want to meet her." They spent the afternoon meeting families, hearing stories, seeing firsthand the impact of their fight. And with every conversation, Evelyn felt her purpose solidify. This wasn't just about defeating Crow or passing a bill. This was about real people living real lives, trying to build something better for their children. This was what mattered. That night, they stayed in a small inn in the mining town. It was nothing like Blackthorn House. The rooms were cramped, the food simple, the furnishings worn. But as Evelyn lay beside the Duke in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night, she felt happier than she'd ever been in London's grandest ballrooms. "This is what it was all for," the Duke said quietly. "Not the power or the political victory. This, giving people a chance to live with dignity." "You sound surprised." "I am." He turned to face her. "I'd spent so long fighting that I'd forgotten what I was fighting for. But seeing those miners today, seeing what the bill actually means to them, it reminded me. This is what matters, not society's approval or Crow's defeat. This. Real lives changed for the better." Evelyn traced her fingers along his jaw. "You're a better man than you think you are." "I'm a better man because of you." He kissed her forehead. "You made me remember how to feel, how to trust, how to fight for something beyond survival." "We made each other better," Evelyn said. "That's what love does." They fell asleep tangled together, and Evelyn dreamed of green fields and clean air, of a future where their children would never know what it felt like to be powerless. 6 months after the wedding, London had changed. Lord Edmund Crow's trial had been swift and brutal. Stripped of his title, his assets seized, he'd been sentenced to 5 years in prison for corruption and fraud. His empire had collapsed so completely it was as if it had never existed. The networks he'd built, the alliances he'd forged, the fear he'd instilled, all of it evaporated the moment his power did. Lord Ashford had resigned from Parliament and retreated to his country estate, disgraced but free. His daughter Catherine had married a minor baron and moved to Scotland, far from the scandal that had consumed her family. Rumor had it she was quieter now, kinder, as if the fall had taught her something about humility. Lady Beatrice Harlow, deprived of Crow's patronage, had seen her social standing plummet. She now attended parties on the margins, no longer the center of attention, no longer feared. Some said she'd become bitter. Others claimed she was finally learning what it meant to survive without cruelty. And the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn had become something London hadn't expected. Heroes. Not because they'd destroyed Crow, though society loved that drama, but because they'd proven something rare and precious, that power used for justice could actually make a difference. Invitations flooded Blackthorn House, genuine ones this time, from people who wanted to know them, not use them. The Duke's political influence had grown, his coal-field bills serving as a model for other reforms. MPs who'd once dismissed him as cold and unapproachable now sought his counsel. Industrialists who'd fought against regulation now quietly implemented safety measures, knowing the tide had turned. And Evelyn, once an invisible outsider, was now one of London's most respected women. She'd begun working with charitable organizations focused on workers' rights and education. Women who'd once mocked her now asked for her advice. Young ladies from the countryside wrote to her, saying she'd inspired them to speak up, to fight back, to refuse to be invisible. But the recognition she treasured most came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to her in careful, unpracticed handwriting. Evelyn opened it to find a note from a miner's wife in the north. "Your Grace, my husband says I should thank you for what you've done. He says the Duke wouldn't have kept fighting if you hadn't stood with him. My Tommy came home safe yesterday because of the new supports they put in the mine. He said they're calling them Blackthorn beams because of what you both did. I wanted you to know that every time I see my husband walk through that door, I think of you. Thank you for giving me my family." With gratitude, Mary Fletcher Evelyn showed it to the Duke that evening and watched tears, rare, precious, form in his eyes. "That's worth more than any title," he said hoarsely. "I know." They framed the letter and hung it in the library, a reminder of what mattered. Over time, more letters joined it. Notes from families whose lives had been changed, from workers who felt seen for the first time, from mothers whose children would grow up safer because two people had refused to stop fighting. The wall became a testament, not to power or victory, but to the simple, profound truth that standing up for what's right could actually change the world. As spring turned to summer, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. The Duke's reaction was equal parts joy and terror. He'd never imagined himself a father, never thought he'd build something as fragile and precious as a family. But Evelyn had never been more certain of anything. "Our child will grow up knowing they're loved," she told him one evening as they sat in the gardens, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "They'll never know what it feels like to be alone or powerless, because we'll teach them different. We'll teach them that power means responsibility, that truth matters more than comfort, and that fighting for what's right is always worth it." The Duke pulled her close, his hand covering hers. "They'll be lucky to have you as a mother." "They'll be lucky to have you as a father," she smiled. "You fought an empire to protect people you'd never met. Imagine what you'll do for your own child." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Evelyn felt the future unfold before them like a map, uncertain in details but clear in direction. They would raise their children with love and principles. They would continue fighting for reforms, for justice, for the people who had no voice. They would build something better than what they'd inherited, together. The Duke began making plans, converting part of Blackthorn House into a school for workers' children, establishing scholarships for talented students from mining families, creating a trust to support families who lost breadwinners to industrial accidents. Each project carried his grandmother's name, honoring the woman who'd taught him that nobility meant service. And with every project, Evelyn saw her husband transform. The cold, distant Duke was still there. He'd never be demonstrative or effusive, but now there was warmth beneath the ice, purpose beneath the control. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, let himself feel joy without fearing it would be used against him. He was healing. They both were. 1 year to the day after their wedding, the Duke and Evelyn returned to St. Margaret's Church, not for a ceremony, but for a memorial. The Duke had established a foundation in his grandmother's name to support workers' rights, education, and safety reforms. The first project was a monument to miners who died in unsafe conditions, a simple stone marker engraved with names that had been forgotten by everyone except their families. The unveiling drew hundreds, miners, families, workers from across England. They stood in the churchyard under gray skies, listening as the Duke spoke. "My grandmother believed in fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. She taught me that power without purpose is tyranny, and that the measure of a person isn't their title or wealth, but what they do for others. This monument honors those who died because the powerful valued profit over people. But it also represents a promise that we will fight to ensure no more names are added to this stone, that every worker deserves safety, dignity, and fair wages, that truth and justice matter more than comfort or convenience. He looked at Evelyn, standing beside him with their infant daughter in her arms. My wife taught me something equally important, that fighting alone is survival, but fighting together is how we change the world. She reminded me what it means to trust, to love, to believe that better is possible. And because of her, I'm not standing here as a duke honoring the dead. I'm standing here as a father promising the living that my daughter will grow up in a world where power serves people, not the other way around. The crowd erupted in applause, genuine, thunderous, heartfelt. And Evelyn, watching her husband speak truth to a world that had tried to break him, felt tears stream down her face. They'd walked into hell together, and they'd come out transformed. Not perfect, not unburdened, but stronger, braver, and utterly unbreakable. That evening, back at Blackthorn House, they stood on the same balcony where they'd first confessed their love. Their daughter, Adelaide, named for the Duke's grandmother, slept peacefully in the nursery, watched over by nurses. The house hummed with quiet contentment. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked. "That night you agreed to dance with me?" The Duke smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "Not for a second. You were the best dare anyone ever took." "I was terrified." "So was I." He pulled her close. "But we were terrified together. And that made all the difference." They kissed as the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the city, people were still playing games, still manipulating, still choosing power over principle. But here, in this moment, the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn had something those people would never understand: truth, love, and the absolute certainty that they'd never face the world alone again. Years later, when Adelaide was old enough to ask about her parents' story, Evelyn would tell her the truth about the dare, the dance, the battles fought and won, about how an outsider and a duke had stood together against corruption and emerged victorious. But the lesson she'd emphasize most was this: that courage isn't the absence of fear, that love isn't the absence of conflict, and that changing the world doesn't require perfection. It requires truth. It requires choosing what's right over what's easy. And it requires finding someone who'll stand beside you when the entire world says you're wrong. Because in the end, that's what survival really means. Not enduring alone, but building something, together, that's worth fighting for. The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn had learned that lesson the hard way, in ballrooms that judged them, in committee rooms that doubted them, in the harsh industrial landscape where real people lived and died based on decisions made by the powerful. They'd learned it through scandal and strategy, through fear and fury, through moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. But they'd also learned something else: that two people fighting for truth could topple an empire built on lies. That love wasn't weakness, it was the strongest weapon they had. And that the girl from nowhere and the Duke everyone feared could become something London had never seen before. Partners, equals, proof that power used for justice could actually change the world. And they'd spent the rest of their lives teaching that lesson to anyone brave enough to listen. Through the school they built, the reforms they championed, the example they set, and the daughter they raised to believe that her voice mattered, that truth was worth fighting for, and that she was never, ever powerless. The dare that had started it all became legend in London, a story told at parties and whispered in drawing rooms, embellished and romanticized until it barely resembled what had actually happened. But Evelyn and Adrian, because in private they used their given names now, had earned that intimacy, didn't care about the legends. They cared about the truth. And the truth was simple. They'd chosen each other when the world told them not to. They'd fought when fighting seemed impossible. They'd loved when love seemed like suicide. And they'd won, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to be broken.